So welcome back to our series here inside of Substance Designer. So I'm about to start up a brand new substance. So let's talk a little bit about what these substances are and what these templates on the left hand side over here currently are. So you'll see I have an empty template which basically gives me no outputs at all. And then I also have physically based metallic and physically based specular glossy. So the way these two work, and this is the way that I think about physically based shaders. So a physically based shader, if I'm gonna create something that is a conductive material. So conductive materials are things that are metals, right? So you're thinking about conductive metals. Those you would use physically based metallic roughness because you're able to generate a map that gives substance and whatever program you're going to use it into render, it gives it the information that it needs to create a specular highlight that's either going to be based off of the actual diffuse or albedo color or not. So for the other physically based lighting in here, or the physically based shader in here, we have specular and glossy. Specular and glossy for me is realistically more for dielectric materials, and dielectric materials have a neutral specular color. So something, if you think of something like a wood floor, if you look at a wood floor, whatever the light in the room is, that's what color will be reflected back from the actual surface. So if you had a more yellowish light in your room, then that's what's going to be reflected back. So for specular and glossy, that specularity color rather is going to really be based more off of the light source than the actual shader itself. For a conductive material, it is completely going to be based off of the diffuse color of that particular metal. So that's kind of how I keep those two things straight in my head. So right now we know that we're not making, I know that I'm not making a metal, I'm making a fabric. So I'm going to do this as specular and glossiness. And then over here you can see I can give this graph a name. So let's call this denim. I'm going to say new text. Sure. And you can see it says size mode is either absolute or relative to the parent. If I do absolute will control everything. So if I do absolute right now, if I change this to 4096 by 4096, then it would be 4096 for every node that we made inside of Substance. If I chose this to be relative to parent, it would basically take the last node, look at the size of that node, and you can have different size nodes, this is honestly, I actually like being able to do relative to parent a lot of times, because what that lets me do is it lets me be able to control individual parts of my texture. So in here right now you can see this is all 4096, but if I didn't need this to be 4096, I could drop this down. Simple things could be one size and some of the other things can be another size, and then I can work those guys kind of together. And then I also have a standard template over here. Standard is a traditional template that has specularity, glossiness. It's not really based off of energy, conserving energy like a real shader should be. It's really just like the standard Phong, Lamberts, and other things that you find in other programs. And then the last four in here are specific to Substance Painter. So you can make a shader inside of Substance Designer and then use it and paint with it inside of Substance Painter, which is actually really cool. So I'm just going to do specular glossiness, and you can see my output. I've got a diffuse, I've got a normal, I've got a specular, and I've got a glossy. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. So I have a brand new graph inside of Substance Designer at this point. So with my brand new graph, let's talk about some things that pop up. So over here on my right hand side, and actually I'm going to see if I can go back to reset my layout to default, just so my screen looks like your screen. So you can see the Explorer over here. There's this right here is my actual graph that I'm working with right now, and you can see that my current graph is 256 by 256. And down here I've got my library. So this is where I find all of my generators, like my noise generators, my pattern generators, all the filters that I can use, material filters, 3D view stuff. There are some actual examples of PBR shaders already in here if you want to use those. And then MDL. MDL is something brand new from NVIDIA. It is material definition language. So material definition language, basically, it's just a new technique from NVIDIA. It's not scripting, so it's not using C++ to build a shader in a traditional sense. It's actually just using instructions from here to run it a different way for NVIDIA based stuff that you can kind of get some more performance out of. I have not used MDL shaders yet, so I haven't used the new technology that NVIDIA is kind of pushing out there right now. But you know, as I said before, I'm not a fan of a proprietary type of technology. So I've got my library. On the left hand side is the section that I'm in, and the right hand side I can actually see those nodes. I'll put this down to medium so we can see more of these. So these right now are currently substances. If I go here to my generators, you can see these are noises. So these are all noises that I have, and then these are all patterns. Now I didn't download these from anywhere. These are what come with Substance Designer. So with these patterns, you can pretty much generate anything you can think of, depending on how you work them together. So the next thing I have over here is I have my graph view. So my main window here is my graph view, and I can middle mouse, use the scroll wheel to zoom, to kind of dolly the camera in and out. I can hold down the Alt key. If I just hold down middle mouse button, it lets me pan, and then just kind of move in here, and that's really it. So really, you can just use Alt key to get around inside of here. You hit middle mouse, it brings up, you know, you can add comments, you can add a frame, add a pin, and this is really a great way to be able to organize yourself, because you want to add comments to things, because when you come back to them later, you might not remember exactly what you were doing when you were doing it. So adding yourself some comments, just as if you were working with code, adding in comments of, you know, this is the diffuse controller, or this is whatever, then you can easily get back to your stuff. Right below that, I have my 3D view, and then to the right of the 3D view, I have my 2D view. So my 3D view is actually navigatable just like a 3D viewport. It is a 3D viewport. I can use my right mouse button. It's basically Maya controls. So right mouse button is my dolly my camera in and out. Left mouse button orbits my camera, and then middle mouse button actually lets me pan my camera. And that's kind of it. Now, one of the other things is that when I'm looking at my material, I can look at the channels and make sure I have all the channels of this actually turned on. You can see definition. Definition right now is set to physical metallic default. This is my default one. So I want to turn this on to physical specular glossiness, and I'm going to do a parallax occlusion. So now this model is set up more so for my specular and glossy type of model, and you want to make sure you change that. And then environment is just the kind of trees and stuff behind there, and then I can display wireframes if I want to. Of course, bounding boxes, I can show them with the grid for the ground. I can do resolution, and it shows me the resolution down here, which right now we're 570, you know. And then the renderer, like I say, you can choose iRay or OpenGL. If I edit this, I don't think there's any settings that you can actually change for that. I know you can change settings for the iRay. Yeah, so OpenGL is just basically using OpenGL raw the way that it is. So I've kind of got this stuff set up, and then I've got my 2D viewer over here, and in my 2D viewer I can have a background image if I choose to. I'm not going to put one in there, and I can save the current image as a bitmap. I can also come in here and look at the different parts of this. So I can look at just diffuse, just normals, just speculas, just glossiness, and then also I'm able to come in here and copy it to the clipboard and bring it somewhere else. Down at the bottom of this, I can look at all three of my channels. I can make sure I'm looking at alpha, and I can switch between grayscale and color, and then also I can make sure that this is set up for the sRGB space, and then also being able to pre-multiply my alpha, so I can see what my pre-multiplied alpha looks like, get information on my image, and then also see a histogram of my image as well. And you can always, frame it up or do one-to-one or frame it up however you want to. And this right now is currently locked. I can unlock this. So this is kind of my little 2D viewer and stuff in here. I don't really need info or the histogram or anything like that. So over here is kind of my property panel. So if I click on my actual graph, you can see this graph. The base parameters of this graph is the output size, is the width and the height is set to 0, which is set to 256 by 256. If I turn this up to 1, you can see that it's now at 512 by 512. If I go lower than that, if I go lower than anything below 1 or below 0 rather, starts to give me the other side of the spectrum. So after you get down to, I believe it's -8, you're not gonna get anything less than that. Like, it's weird. Well, it's not really weird. It actually makes sense. So if you know anything, if you know about texturing, you'll know that textures work off of, well, actually game engines like square textures. So you can use rectangular textures and out of source textures, but the game engine likes more square textures if you can give it to it. So that's always good to be able to do. Give it as much square as you want to. And then you also have your output format. For this right now, it's going to be 8-bit per channel. So 8-bit per channel. I've got 4 channels, and so that's going to end up giving me a high color image. You can set this to 16-bit color per channel, which gives me more range of gamut. I cannot see them with my eye, but the computer can see them and manipulate all that extra data, because realistically, the human eye sees like 16.7 million, and we have so we don't have the ability to see as much as other animals do. Some animals actually see more than humans can as far as the visible light spectrum. Our eyes are awesome, but they're actually we only have 3 cones in it, so we really can only perceive red, green, and blue, and then those 3 mix together to make all the other. There's either an addition or a subtraction of light waves to make color. So we only have 3 cones inside of our eye. There's some animals that have 5. There's some that have 16 cones. So it's kind of like they're like on a psychedelic trip all the time. Maybe that's why I believe I've read before that butterflies have like 5 cones in their eyes, which is why they probably always fly kind of flighty. They're like bouncing around and kind of zooming in circles. That's probably why they're like that, because they're like, oh my god, look at all the colors, man. So anyway, I can set this to higher color channel, and then I have my pixel size, like what my pixel size is going to be. I'm just going to leave this at 1. And then tiling method, I'm going to have H and V, so it's going to have horizontal and vertical tiling for the textures that I make. And then I can randomize my textures by using random seed. And then I also have other attributes in here, so I can write out things like category, label, author. So this is stuff that you would want for yourself. You can give yourself an icon for this. You've got input parameters, which right now we don't have any, and we have input images, which we don't have any, and then we get output images. Output images, we're going to be outputting a diffuse, a normal, specular, and a glossy, and that's the nodes that are actually output right here. Now you can add additional nodes to this. You can end up adding additional nodes and saying, hey, I want to have a height map as well. I want to have maybe light map or emissive map rather. So you can add other things into that mapping if you choose to. So that's kind of the overview of my panels in here. Now my main panel, my main graph panel, I've got a frame up button so I can frame up my whole entire shader network. I've got a 1-to-1 to reset my zoom to 1-to-1. Of course I can do info in here, and I can see connector names, node sizes, and then timings. I can turn off, I think I'll turn off timings, leave timings off for right now. And then I can also come in here and search for particular nodes. I can see this, have this kind of bar up at the very top. And this bar is a mimic of something. So if I hold down space, if I hit space bar, then these are the same things as what's up here in this little title bar. And earlier versions of Substance didn't have that bar, so I got used to using the space bar just for whatever I wanted. So if I like gradient map blends and things like that. And then also you can actually have your things connect standardly, or have compact, or you can compact your materials, or and this will make more sense once we get in there. And then you can choose the way that your materials actually connect to each other. So by default, if I make another node in here, I'm just going to make this just so we can see it. If I make another node, you'll see that it's kind of like a Bezier curve, so it kind of just smooths itself out and kind of wanders around. If I click on this straight line right here, so I can have rectangular links, you'll see it just makes straight graph lines. That's all that it does. It's nothing really cool. It's nothing really super cool. And I can reset all my timings, and then of course in here I can clean up my graph. Things that are not being used. So if I disconnected this and something is like sitting off to the side, if I came in here and said clean, it would clean up anything that's not connected to an output node or connected into the graph in any way. It would just clean it out. So that's kind of the overview of interface. And in the next video, we'll start to build out our shader.